Today's housing market is pricey and competitive. The supply of homes for sale is low, and prices are 53% higher than they were 5 years ago. Then there are mortgage rates, which have more than doubled since 2022.
And I do want to note that mortgage rates shot up yesterday after the Fed announcement.
Although rates are high, the mortgage market itself is healthy, with low numbers of delinquencies and foreclosures. The vast majority of home loans today are backed by the federal government, either through the Federal Housing Administration, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie and Freddie used to be private companies, but since 2008, they've been under close government supervision. Some now say that conservatorship needs to end.
So if everything is running smoothly now, though, the mortgage market is running well, why take them out of conservatorship?
See, I think the concern is that there are underlying problems that are being missed. We have a mortgage finance system that works really well on the upside, but is it prepared for a downturn? While I am optimistic about the overall state of the economy, are we putting the taxpayer at risk?
Others say ending the conservatorship is a solution looking for a problem.
I think it's unlikely that Fannie and Freddie will be released from conservatorship. It just doesn't make economic sense.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac buy mortgages from lenders. They then pool those loans into products called mortgage-backed securities. They then sell those securities to investors. In doing so, they funnel the money that lenders need in order to lend.
Ultimately, what investors are willing to pay for those mortgage-backed securities determine how much Fannie and Freddie could pay the lender who originates. So it all flows back to the lender.
And that determines mortgage rates.
Exactly.
Fannie and Freddie are also known as government-sponsored enterprises, or the GSEs. Fannie Mae was initially a government agency, chartered in 1938. Its mission was to ensure a reliable and affordable supply of mortgages. It became a private entity in 1968. Freddie Mac was created in 1970 by an act of Congress. It was a private company that helped mortgage lenders manage their interest rate risks. The activity at these firms helped stabilize mortgage markets during periods of stress or turmoil. And turmoil came in 2008 when the housing market came crashing down after a massive run-up in the preceding years. This housing bubble formed in the market for mortgage-backed securities. Subprime mortgages were the big problem. Investment banks were offering products to entice lower-income borrowers and real estate investors. The loans required no down payments and offered very low teaser rates. They also had negative amortization plans, which meant that the interest could be deferred to a later date. That bubble burst as interest rates rose, adjusting those new mortgages to higher rates. Borrowers defaulted on their loans, and home prices crashed.
Foreclosures are rising, and the biggest problem is that prices continue to drop. Until home prices stop falling, things just aren't going to get any better.
In 2008 alone, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac lost a combined $109 billion stemming from those risky loans. They were placed into government conservatorship that year. The Federal Housing Finance Agency would be their conservator, and the Treasury would give the mortgage giants two $100 billion credit lines. The value of Fannie and Freddie's stocks plunged to basically nothing.
The fact that the government will now begin buying loans to the tune of $5 billion for a start will have a direct effect on the housing market, specifically through mortgage rates and availability.
Between 2008 and 2011, the two lost $266 billion. The majority of that came from the risky loans they bought in 2006 and 2007.
Treasury Secretary Paulson at the time, under President Bush, this was in that period, said, I'm fearful that these entities are just going to fail. We can't let that happen because the economy and the housing market is falling apart anyway. So if I let these guys fail, it's going to be a complete disaster. So they decided to put them in conservatorship, and in my mind, that was a good decision.
In 2012, the Treasury also initiated a sweep of their profits, requiring the two to return nearly all that money to the government. It was a way of getting taxpayer bailout money back over time. Fannie and Freddie shareholders would get no future profits. The housing market slowly recovered, those risky loans were made illegal, and careful, tight underwriting became the norm. In 2019, with $301 billion paid to Treasury, the FHFA ended the sweep, allowing Fannie and Freddie to hold on to their profits and recapitalize their balance sheets.
So there certainly could be a concern that the government has used its ability to coordinate policies for Fannie and Freddie, and we saw this during the pandemic. We were quickly be able to set up forbearance programs that had a fair amount of uniformity. I'm proud of the fact that when we set those programs up, other private market participants who weren't obligated to follow them mirrored them.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were put into government conservatorship 16 years ago. Now, the second Trump administration is expected to try to release them back into the private market. They tried 5 years ago, but that effort was sidelined by Congress and the pandemic.
We literally spent millions of dollars on plans. All of those are still on the shelf. In April of 2019, we really started the process to have Fannie and Freddie exit conservatorship, which is functionally a bankruptcy proceeding. And of course, the number one constraint on us was lack of capital.
At the time, major stockholders like Pershing Square's Bill Ackman were very optimistic. He spoke to Yahoo Finance late in 2017 about the potential upside to ending conservatorship.
We think all of the conditions necessary for a resolution of Fannie and Freddie are here.
Ackman returned to the topic late in 2024 with a post on X. He wrote that Fannie and Freddie are his top stock picks, as he expects them to be privatized under the new administration. Ackman had been on hand at the New York Stock Exchange just a few weeks before when President-elect Trump rang the opening bell.
And we're stepping into, I would say, the most pro-growth, pro-business, pro-American administration I've perhaps seen in my adult lifetime.
But it wasn't just a lack of capital that thwarted the first attempt. Congress would not agree to an explicit government backstop to newly privatized companies. Without that, it would be tough to get private investors to buy in.
When it comes to the corporate finance part of this, policymakers really need to think about creating business models that will attract $150 or $200 billion of capital. They're going to have to give investors the opportunity to actually get a return on that, and they're going to have to do that in a way that doesn't require homeowners to pay dramatically higher mortgage rates.
But supporters argue that, explicit or not, the government would bail out the GSEs even if they were privatized, just like they did for small banks during the Silicon Valley Bank failure in 2023.
Congress has given you a framework based on the FDIC. So just as last year with Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, Signature, all of these institutions, Congress created a similar framework for Fannie and Freddie. Now, Congress can, of course, change that framework. And when we were moving toward reform in 2019, I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill talking to members both sides of the aisle, both sides of the Hill, laying out what we were going to do. I'll first say nobody said stop.
Both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have built up significant capital in the last few years, but it is debatable how much would be required to privatize them. The Congressional Budget Office estimates a required capital range from $267 to $534 billion. And then there's the question of a government guarantee. Treasury Secretary Bessent has said nothing yet about privatizing Fannie and Freddie, but the decision would fall to him and the FHFA director.
I suspect that a new Treasury Secretary may go through this effort himself. I'm trying to figure out, will Congress be a partner here? And it's very hard for members of Congress to do GSE reform without annoying some constituency.
Why are we doing all this? I mean, what's wrong with the system that we have now? I mean, it's providing mortgages at a low-cost, efficient way, and it's offloading the risk to private investors. The taxpayers' exposure has been meaningfully reduced, less than your typical bank. If you privatize them without any kind of guarantee or any kind of backstop, the cost is going to go up. It's by definition, it's going up.
Today's housing market is one of the most unaffordable in history. High home prices, high mortgage rates, high labor costs, high material costs, short supply, and high demand. It is a toxic cocktail for many potential buyers. Privatizing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would not change those fundamentals, and doing so, some argue, could add to them.
If policymakers were required them to hold 5% or 10% capital, the only way to make a business model viable is to charge more money for mortgages.
One of the strongest arguments is that mortgage rates would go up, but supporters like Calabria claim they would not and could even go down. Moody's economist Mark Zandi estimates that without an explicit or implicit government guarantee of the mortgage giants, mortgage rates would rise by 60 to 90 basis points. Rates today are already above the average range going back several decades. He also argues that privatizing them would push more people to government-insured FHA loans, resulting in more taxpayer exposure.
And if you talk to any Americans in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, their number one issue is, can I ever afford to become a homeowner? I'm a renter and I want to be a homeowner. Can that ever happen? Right now, they're looking at mortgage rates and house prices and what their monthly mortgage payment's going to be. They're saying, no way. If we privatize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that no way is going to be never. It's not going to happen.